Picture this. You are standing in a dimly lit chamber within the royal palace of Madrid. The year is 1700, and you have just witnessed something that will haunt medical science for centuries. The most powerful monarch in Europe has just died, and what the royal physicians are about to discover inside his body will defy everything they thought they knew about human anatomy. Charles II of Spain lies motionless on the marble table, his pale skin almost translucent in the flickering candle light. But it is not just another royal autopsy. What they are about to uncover will be so shocking, so impossible that some of the findings will be dismissed as fabrications for over 300 years. The chief physician approaches with trembling hands, his surgical instruments gleaming in the golden light. He has no idea that he is about to document one of the most strange medical mysteries in recorded history. A king whose body contains secrets that would challenge the very foundations of medicine itself, secrets so disturbing that some theorists believe that certain parts of Charles's autopsy may have been withheld due to political or religious sensitivities, possibly stored in restricted archives, though this has never been officially confirmed. Before diving into these forgotten medical discoveries, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this, and please comment below to let me know where you are listening from. I find it amazing that we are exploring these ancient mysteries together from different corners of the world, connected across time and space by our shared fascination with the past. What you are about to hear is not just another tale of royal excess or political intrigue. It is the story of how centuries of royal inbreeding created a human being so genetically damaged that his very existence challenged the boundaries of what medical science believed possible. Charles II was not just the last Habsburg ruler of Spain. He was a living experiment in genetic disaster, and his autopsy would reveal conditions so extreme that modern doctors still struggle to explain them. But here is where it gets truly interesting. While the world knows about Charles II of Spain and his notorious autopsy, there is another Charles II whose death holds equally shocking secrets. Charles II of England died 85 years before his Spanish namesake, and his autopsy findings tell a completely different, but equally compelling story of royal deception and hidden truths. Two kings, two countries, two sets of autopsy findings that would reshape our understanding of royal medicine forever. But only one of them carried a secret so dangerous, so politically explosive that it remained hidden for generations. Let us start with the Spanish Charles because his story reads like something from a medical horror novel. Born in 1661, Charles II of Spain was the product of one of the most extreme inbreeding experiments in human history. His family tree was not so much a tree as it was a telephone pole with the same names appearing over and over again in a dizzying cycle of genetic repetition. The Habsburg dynasty had spent centuries marrying cousins to cousins, uncles to nieces, creating a genetic nightmare that would culminate in Charles himself. By the time he was born, his inbreeding coefficient was higher than that of children born to brother-sister pairs. Think about that for a moment. The royal bloodline had become so concentrated that Charles was more inbred than the offspring of siblings. From the moment of his birth, it was clear that something was fundamentally wrong. Charles did not walk until he was 6 years old. He did not speak coherently until he was 8. His head was misshapen. His jaw protruded so dramatically that he could not properly chew food. And his tongue was so large that courtiers often could not understand what he was trying to say. But the physical deformities were just the beginning. As Charles grew into adolescence, it became apparent that the genetic damage went far deeper than anyone had imagined. The young prince suffered from what modern medical experts now recognize as a constellation of genetic disorders so severe that his very survival was a miracle. Palace physicians documented seizures that would leave him unconscious for hours. His limbs would sometimes become paralyzed for days at a time. He suffered from what they called melancholic episodes where he would retreat into catatonic states, staring blankly at walls for weeks on end. The court learned to operate around their king's unpredictable medical crisis, never knowing when he might collapse or how long he would remain incapacitated. Contemporary accounts describe Charles as being in a constant state of ill health. But what they could not understand was the systematic nature of his decline. Every organ system in his body was failing simultaneously, as if his genetic code was actively working against his survival. The most tragic aspect of Charles's condition was his desperate desire to produce an heir. Despite being married twice, he remained childless, and the failure to continue the Habsburg line consumed him with shame and desperation. Palace records reveal that he consulted with dozens of physicians, alchemists, and even supposed miracle workers, all promising cures for his mysterious ailments. What makes Charles's case so medically fascinating is that his symptoms were so severe and so varied that 17th-century physicians had no framework for understanding what they were observing. They attributed his condition to everything from demonic possession to divine punishment, never realizing they were witnessing the end result of one of history's most extreme genetic experiments. When Charles finally died on November 1, 1700 at the age of 38, the decision to perform an autopsy was unprecedented. Kings were typically buried with their secrets intact. But Charles's death was so mysterious and the political implications so enormous that the royal court demanded answers. The autopsy began at dawn, conducted by the most skilled physicians in Madrid. What they discovered would be carefully documented in reports that read like science fiction. The king's body was a catalogue of impossibilities. Conditions so extreme that modern doctors still debate whether the historical accounts could possibly be accurate. But here is where the Spanish Charles's story intersects with an even more intriguing mystery. 300 meters away and 15 years earlier, another king named Charles II had died under equally mysterious circumstances. Charles II of England had ruled for 25 years, surviving plague, fire, political upheaval, and constant threats to his throne. Unlike his Spanish counterpart, the English Charles was known for his robust health, his love of physical activity, and his legendary appetite for life's pleasures. He was a patron of science, a founder of the Royal Society, and a man who prided himself on his intellectual curiosity. But behind the public facade of health and vitality, Charles was conducting secret experiments that would ultimately cost him his life. The English Charles had built a private laboratory in the basement of Whitehall Palace, where he spent hours conducting alchemical experiments. His particular obsession was with mercury, the mysterious liquid metal that alchemists believed held the key to transmuting base metals into gold. What Charles did not realize was that his amateur chemistry was slowly poisoning him with one of the most toxic substances known to man. The symptoms began subtly. Tremors in his hands that he attributed to age. Difficulty concentrating during council meetings. Occasional slurred speech that courtiers politely ignored. But as the mercury accumulated in his system, the symptoms became impossible to hide. On February 2, 1685, Charles collapsed during his morning routine, crying out in agony as seizures racked his body. The royal physicians were summoned immediately, but what they found defied their understanding of medicine. The king's symptoms were unlike anything they had encountered, and their treatments would prove to be almost as deadly as the condition itself. What followed was 3 days of medical torture that would make modern doctors cringe. The physicians bled Charles repeatedly, draining pint after pint of blood in the belief that they were purging harmful humors from his system. They applied heated cups to his skin, creating massive blisters that they believed would draw out toxins. They forced him to swallow purgatives that induced violent vomiting and diarrhea. But the most disturbing aspect of Charles's final days was not the brutal medical treatments. It was the secret that he carried to his deathbed. A revelation so politically explosive that it remained hidden from most of his subjects for centuries. As Charles lay dying, he made a request that would shock the Protestant nation he had ruled for over 2 decades. In a carefully orchestrated ceremony conducted in absolute secrecy, the king who had defended the Church of England throughout his reign was about to reveal the truth about his deepest beliefs. The implications of this deathbed revelation would ripple through English history for generations. But the immediate concern was the autopsy that would follow. What the physicians found inside Charles's body would provide the first documented evidence of industrial poisoning in the modern era, though they would not understand the significance of their discoveries for another 3 centuries. 2 kings, 2 autopsies, 2 sets of findings that would challenge everything the medical establishment thought they knew about human physiology. But only one of them carried a secret so dangerous that it had to be buried along with the body itself. The autopsy of Charles II of England began just hours after his death, conducted by the same royal physicians who had tortured him with their treatments during his final days. What they discovered inside his body would provide the first clues to a mystery that would not be fully understood until the 20th century. The brain examination revealed the most telling evidence. Charles's cerebral ventricles were filled with an unusual amount of fluid, a condition that modern medicine recognizes as consistent with heavy metal poisoning. But the 17th century physicians had no framework for understanding what they were observing. They documented the findings meticulously, noting the abnormal fluid accumulation, the swollen blood vessels, and the strange discoloration of brain tissue. What they could not have known was that they were looking at the physical evidence of months of mercury exposure. Every morning that Charles had spent in his secret laboratory heating mercury in open crucibles, he had been breathing invisible vapors that crossed directly into his bloodstream and accumulated in his brain. The tremors, the confusion, the seizures that marked his final days were all classic symptoms of mercury poisoning. But medical science would not make these connections for another 300 years. The most remarkable aspect of Charles's autopsy was what it revealed about his hair. There are unconfirmed reports that hair samples from Charles showed elevated mercury levels when analyzed with modern techniques, though no official documentation has been published. Some researchers suggest that Charles's fascination with alchemy, particularly mercury, may have contributed to symptoms consistent with poisoning, although direct evidence of self-experimentation remains speculative. But the mercury poisoning was only part of the story. The real secret that Charles carried to his grave was far more politically dangerous than any medical condition. As he lay dying, knowing that his Protestant kingdom would never accept what he was about to reveal, Charles made arrangements for the most carefully orchestrated deception in English royal history. The king summoned his brother James, the Duke of York, and whispered instructions that would have to be carried out with absolute secrecy. Every servant was dismissed from the royal chambers. The doors were locked and double-locked. What happened next would remain hidden from Parliament, from the Church of England, and from the English people themselves. Father John Huddleston, a Catholic priest who had once saved Charles's life after the Battle of Worcester, was smuggled into the king's apartment through secret passages. The same man who had helped Charles escape Cromwell's forces 34 years earlier was now being called upon to perform an even more dangerous service. In the flickering candle light of the royal bedchamber with only the most trusted Catholic courtiers as witnesses, Charles II confessed his sins, renounced his Protestant faith, and was received into the Roman Catholic Church. The king who had defended Anglican supremacy for 25 years died as a Catholic convert. His true religious beliefs finally revealed in his last moments. The political implications were staggering. If Charles's Protestant subjects had discovered that their king had secretly converted to Catholicism, it could have triggered another civil war. The memory of Catholic persecution under Queen Mary was still fresh in English minds, and the fear of papal influence over the monarchy was one of the most powerful forces in 17th century politics. The conversion ceremony itself was fraught with drama. When Father Huddleston attempted to give Charles the consecrated host, it became stuck in the dying king's throat. Water had to be brought to help him swallow. And witnesses reported that Charles whispered to the priest, "You have saved my life twice now. First my body and now my soul." The secret was so closely guarded that most historians did not learn about it until centuries later. The official records made no mention of any religious conversion. The Anglican bishops who conducted Charles's funeral had no idea that they were burying a Catholic king. The deception was so complete that even many of Charles's own courtiers remained unaware of what had transpired in those final hours. But the conversion was not entirely spontaneous. Secret diplomatic documents discovered in French archives revealed that Charles had been planning this moment for years. In 1670, he had signed the Treaty of Dover with Louis XIV of France, agreeing to convert to Catholicism in exchange for French gold and military support. The treaty contained a secret clause that promised Louis would provide 6,000 soldiers to help Charles suppress any Protestant rebellion that might result from his conversion. For 15 years, Charles had delayed fulfilling this promise, using various excuses to postpone his public conversion while continuing to receive French subsidies. He understood perfectly well that revealing his Catholic sympathies would destroy his reign. But he also could not bring himself to completely abandon the faith that had sustained him through his darkest hours of exile. The deathbed conversion was Charles's compromise with his own conscience. He could die as a Catholic without ever having to face the political consequences of ruling as one. It was a masterpiece of royal deception, allowing him to satisfy both his spiritual needs and his political survival instincts. Meanwhile, in Spain, the autopsy of Charles II was revealing medical impossibilities that would baffle physicians for centuries. The chief physician's report, written in precise Latin, documented conditions that seemed to defy the laws of human biology. The heart, according to the autopsy report, was the size of a peppercorn, a description so extraordinary that modern cardiologists still debate whether it could possibly be accurate. A human heart cannot function at such a reduced size. Yet Charles had somehow lived for 38 years with this condition. Even more bizarre was the discovery that one physician's report claimed there was not a single drop of blood, likely an exaggeration or a symbolic expression of his extreme anemia or circulatory collapse. This finding was so impossible that many historians dismissed it as an exaggeration or a mistranslation. But recent analysis of the genetic conditions that plagued the Habsburg line suggests that the autopsy described abnormalities in his reproductive organs, including a testicle said to be black as coal. Some modern theorists have speculated about possible intersex conditions, though there is no medical consensus. But the most disturbing finding was saved for last. When the physicians examined Charles's head, they discovered that his skull was full of water. This condition, known today as hydrocephalus, would have caused constant headaches, cognitive difficulties, and the seizures that plagued Charles throughout his life. The pressure from the accumulated fluid would have been excruciating, turning every day of his existence into a battle against overwhelming pain. The Spanish autopsy report concluded with a medical assessment that reads like a catalogue of impossibilities. The kidney contained 3 large stones. The intestines were putrefactive and gangrenous. The lungs were corroded, and the entire body showed signs of corruption that seemed to predate death itself. These findings were so extreme that they challenged everything 17th-century physicians thought they knew about human anatomy. How could a person survive with such extensive organ damage? How could a heart the size of a peppercorn sustain life? How could a body function without blood? The answers would only come centuries later when modern genetics revealed the true extent of Habsburg inbreeding and its catastrophic consequences. Charles II of Spain was not just sick. He was the end result of a genetic experiment that had pushed human biology to its absolute limits. But even with all these documented medical horrors, there was one finding from Charles's autopsy that was deemed too shocking, too politically dangerous to include in the official records. This secret discovery was sealed away in Vatican archives where it remains classified to this day, accessible only to a handful of medical historians who have been sworn to secrecy about its contents. What could have been so disturbing that it required centuries of concealment? What finding could have been worse than a bloodless body or a peppercorn-sized heart? The answer lies in the intersection of medicine, politics, and religious doctrine, where the autopsy of a Spanish king revealed truths that threatened the very foundations of divine monarchy itself. The final secret hidden in Charles II's autopsy was not about his organs or his blood. It was about something far more fundamental to the concept of kingship itself. When the physicians made their final examination of his brain, they discovered something that would have shattered the divine right of kings if it had ever been made public. The brain tissue itself told a story that contradicted everything the Catholic Church taught about royal bloodlines and God's chosen rulers. Deep within the cerebral matter, the physicians found evidence of profound structural abnormalities that went beyond the hydrocephalus already documented. The brain showed signs of developmental arrest, so severe that modern neurologists would classify it as incompatible with normal consciousness. Yet somehow, Charles had ruled an empire for 35 years. The implications were staggering. If the king's brain was so malformed, who had truly been making the decisions that shaped Spanish policy? Palace records, sealed alongside the autopsy, suggest that Charles's decisions were heavily influenced and often fully managed by his ministers and family. The real rulers of Spain had carefully maintained the illusion of royal authority, while the empire crumbled around them. Charles had been dressed, positioned, and guided through public appearances, with words whispered for him to repeat. The divine right of kings was reduced to an elaborate performance. What made this discovery even more politically explosive was the Vatican's involvement. Church officials had known of Charles's condition since childhood, participated in the cover-up, and continued to support his reign, fully aware that Spain was being led by a mentally impaired puppet. The findings not only threatened to expose Charles's reign as a fraud, but also raised questions about the legitimacy of other European monarchs. If Spain's king lacked cognitive function, what did that say about monarchy itself? This is why the most damning evidence was hidden in Vatican archives, protected under religious secrecy. The deception went beyond medicine. Court painters were ordered to soften Charles's deformities. Official portraits showed a melancholy figure, not one with severe disabilities. Foreign ambassadors were given scripted interactions, short ceremonial meetings that avoided deeper discussion. In longer engagements, ministers would speak on Charles's behalf, while he sat silently, unresponsive. Servants reported that Charles sometimes asked why people stared at him, or why he could not recall conversations from hours earlier. These brief moments of awareness were filled with confusion and shame. But monarchy could not admit its king was incapable without collapsing its own foundation. If kings were chosen by God, Charles's condition had to be accepted as divine will. Unlike the English Charles's secret Catholic conversion, the Spanish autopsy exposed a deeper truth: that an entire empire could be led by someone unable to comprehend what power meant. Genetic studies now confirm the extreme inbreeding that created Charles. A genetic dead end whose brain damage revealed the ultimate illusion at the heart of divine monarchy. His condition raised deeply uncomfortable questions about the foundations of monarchy and whether the concept of divine right could survive the harsh realities of human biology. The king, who demanded absolute obedience from his subjects, could not comprehend the concept of authority itself. This is the secret that remains locked away in Vatican archives. The truth, too dangerous to acknowledge even 3 centuries later. Not because it would damage Charles's reputation, but because it would force us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of political legitimacy and the myths we construct around power. The autopsy of Charles II of Spain did not just reveal medical impossibilities. It revealed the impossible contradictions at the heart of hereditary rule itself. And that, perhaps, is why some secrets are deemed too dangerous to tell, even when the kings who carried them have been dead for centuries. The flickering candles, in that Madrid palace chamber, illuminated more than just royal organs on a marble table. They revealed the shadows that absolute power casts over truth itself, and the lengths to which entire civilizations will go to maintain comforting illusions about the nature of authority and legitimacy. Both Charles II of England and Charles II of Spain died with secrets that challenged the foundations of their age. But only one of those secrets was considered so dangerous that it had to be buried forever, hidden away where it continues to whisper uncomfortable truths about power, genetics, and the very human need to believe in the divine right of kings.